Occasionally, there comes along an artist who combines stunning technical ability with masterful composition skills and a singular style that makes his work instantly recognizable. Add in a penchant for Greek mythology, and you've got a recipe for an artist after my own heart. Now, for an extra bonus, throw in an eye for exceedingly alluring female forms, and you've got a phenomenon that results in some downright sexy paintings. Are we allowed to say that? Are we allowed to say that an exquisitely painted masterpiece might actually be sexy? Or is art supposed to transcend such base categories? My friends, I for one am going to say, I hope not. Because I really do think that this artist is a genius of the highest order. And yet, if I had to choose one word, sexy is probably the one I would choose to sum up the work of Herbert James Draper, the forgotten genius of sensual sirens and fantastically fearsome femme fatales. Welcome to Neglected by Art History, brought to you, as always, by the Better Barbarians Bureau. In this series, we look at some great artists and artworks that have been buried by time but deserve wider recognition. If you appreciate this video, please like and subscribe. I'll be posting a lot more like this. And now, Herbert James Draper, the forgotten genius of late classicism. In our last two videos, we looked at the life and art of John William Godward. If you missed those, go ahead and watch them here. I did promise you some more content related to Godward, and I will deliver on that promise eventually, but I figured it might be nice to branch out a bit first. Incidentally, Herbert James Draper was almost an exact contemporary of Godward's. Born just 2 years after Godward in 1863, and coincidentally, he died 2 years before Godward in 1920. Sadly, this means Draper lived only 56 years. We can only wonder what masterpieces he might have left us if he'd been blessed with a longer life. I'll sketch out that life for you quickly because I want to spend most of this video talking about his art. Almost everything I know about his life comes from Wikipedia, so take it with many grains of salt. But why, you ask? Why are you offering us stale Wikipedia facts instead of doing hours upon hours of well-grounded research like you did for the Godward videos? Well, about that. Once again, I've chosen an artist on whom almost nothing has been written. There is one book I could find on Amazon, but it's like $200, and I can't afford that right now. Just as with Godward, it blows my mind that no one over the past century has bothered to write much about Herbert James Draper. I mean, look at his stuff, but I digress. Herbert James Draper was born in London on the 26th of November, 1863. He was one of 7 siblings, but the only boy. His father, John James Draper, was a fruit merchant. I'm guessing that would have made them lower middle class. Not really sure. Whatever the case may be, Herbert James was able to get a good education and then went on to study art at the Royal Academy. He took trips to Paris and Rome between 1888 and 1892 and won the prestigious Royal Academy Gold Medal and Traveling Studentship in 1889. Wikipedia says he worked as an illustrator and settled in London in 1890. I didn't see any of his work that was listed specifically as an illustration as opposed to a standalone painting, but I suppose any of these could have functioned as illustrations, although I think that books at that time were limited to lithographs for reproductions. I could be wrong, don't quote me on that. Still, it seems like these images would have been hard to reproduce with the technology available in the 1890s. So I'm guessing that his illustration work might have comprised different images. I don't really know for sure. You could definitely make the allegation that Draper's work is illustrative, if you wanted to use that term in the derogatory sense that it seems to connote amongst fine art critics and university professors. I personally don't ascribe to the notion that illustration is necessarily inferior to standalone fine arts paintings, but even so, I still think you can make the case that these paintings transcend illustration. Just because something is easy to enjoy doesn't make it bad. Good art doesn't have to be hard to enjoy. I think that is one of the key precepts that I want to champion on this channel. This, to me, plays back into the question, can fine art be sexy? I say yes. More on that later. Anyway, Herbert James Draper got married in 1891 to a woman named Ida, or Nee, Williams. They had a daughter named Yvonne. In 1894 through 1912, or somewhere around then, it seems to have been the most productive period of Herbert James Draper's career. Again, if you watched my previous video on J.W. Godward, then you might recall that Godward's work also flourished during this same period, then went abruptly into a steep decline. What we can gather from that is just more evidence that the aesthetic prejudices of modern art had gained supremacy by this time. It's interesting that 1912 is pretty late in the timeline for the actual developments of modern art. But of course, that makes sense. The tastes and fashions of the broader public lagged behind the actual developments on the ground, so to speak, in the European avant-garde. Now, that particular moment in history is fascinating. I'm starting to see it as a clear pivot point, but I will save that digression for another time. Let's stick with Draper. There's not much more to tell, sadly. Maybe if I can afford to buy that $200 book one day, I'll come back and fill in some of the details from his life with another video. But basically, after the public tastes had shifted away from the mythological subject matter in the early 19-teens, Draper focused more on portraiture, which seems kind of dull compared to his previous work. I think he resorted to it out of financial desperation because his imagination seems to have thrived on mythology. The portraits are okay, but they don't really sing the way his mythological scenes do. He painted his wife, Nee Williams, several times, and my impression is that he loved her. His zest for life expressed in the sexuality of his art makes me think he married a woman he was passionately attracted to, one who embodied the feminine aesthetic that most appealed to him. Maybe I like to imagine him happily married because of how much time I spent dwelling on Godward's unfulfilled love life in my previous two videos. Anyway, Herbert James Draper died at the age of 56 in his home on Abbey Road. He died of a disease that I'm not going to try to pronounce, but it sounds like a very painful way to go, sadly. The year was 1920. Godward would commit suicide 2 years later in 1922 at the age of 61. Thus, the last two exceptional talents of late classicism both died relatively young and close in time. Like I said, if I can get my hands on some academic writing that delves deeper into Draper's life, I'll be happy to revisit him in a future video. But for now, let's switch gears and look a little more in depth at his art. I'm going to go unscripted for the rest of this video. Hopefully all the uhs and ums and uhs don't distract you. I hope to make up for it in spontaneity. I do think that speaking without a script can be refreshing, and I don't know, I prefer to engage with the art with this sense of immediacy. So here goes. Okay, so the first one I've selected is Draper's depiction of Ariadne. Ariadne, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Ariadne is from Greek mythology. She was the princess of Crete. This is the myth related to Theseus and the Minotaur. So she was the daughter of King Minos on Crete. After Theseus escapes, he takes her with him. She's actually the one who helped Theseus to figure out how to get through the labyrinth. So she runs off with Theseus, and he abandons her on the island of Naxos. I don't know, I guess he wakes up and decides he doesn't really want to be with her, and he just leaves her there. So this is the moment when Ariadne has realized that she's been abandoned, and she is lamenting at the edge of the water. Now, just like Godward had his favorite compositional devices, you may remember I talked about the marble bench kind of subcategory. Draper also loves to depict a certain configuration that is like women in the water with a rocky coastline. And just like Godward returned again and again to this sort of marble bench with the distant ocean in the background, Draper's also constantly coming back to these beautiful women in the water, near the water, on a rocky coastline with the ocean. But even though Draper sticks to these same elements over and over again, he still varies a lot more than Godward does in his compositional arrangements. So he uses the same elements, women, rocks, water, but he arranges them in a wider variety of shapes and in a wider variety of ways. He's more playful with composition than Godward ever was. He likes movement, and that's something that Godward was not attracted to. Godward liked stillness, and Draper loves movement. Another thing we don't often see in Godward's work is the psychological dynamic of whatever myth he is depicting. In fact, he doesn't depict actual scenes from mythology that often. Godward usually is only depicting a woman from antiquity who he may sort of give a mythological or historical name to, but it almost feels like he's doing that as a afterthought rather than, the myth or historical person being the actual inspiration. Draper, we can see, is actually inspired by the myth, by the story. He actually cares about the story and wants to portray it. So here we see Ariadne's grief. We can get a sense of this moment where she's just utterly lost. She's realized what's happening, and it's just this utter loss, this utter grief, this heart-wrenching moment. Here's a smaller study of the same painting. I almost like this one better. The colors are less saturated. Part of the reason I like it better might also just be that the image is a higher resolution. So the other one was a little low res. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a better image. But it's sort of, I guess Draper could also be accused, like Godward, of oversaturation in some of his colors. So this image, by just being a little less saturated, is pleasing to me because I can kind of pull back and just appreciate the shape, the form, the value contrast, the precision in the rendering of light and shadow, which I think is another interesting thing to contrast with Godward. I apologize. I'm going to continue to contrast him with Godward just because I think it's interesting since they were in the same sort of class as these late classicists. But yeah, you can see here the light and shadow. It really does speak of that direct sunlight when the sun is higher in the sky. And again, I was saying that Godward tended to shy away from that, except on rare instances and even in instances like I did find this image, which has really strong light and shadow, direct sunlight. But notice it's still not on the actual body of the skin of the figure when in the Godward painting. So that is very interesting. That sticks with what I was criticizing about him before. Now here with Draper, you can see it's he's. You really get this sense of the sunlight hitting her skin, and you can kind of feel this bright Greek sunlight on the shore of this island. Okay, so the Pearls of Aphrodite continues in the same vein. It's got beautiful women on the coastline, huge cliffs in the background, a rocky bay. Now, I wanted to show you the difference in the quality of these two images of the same painting. Isn't that interesting? How much better this one is. I thought I'd start off with the poorer quality and then show you guys the upgrade. So it's just to keep in mind when you're looking at artworks, digital representations of artworks. There's always some question. If you're not familiar with the work, if you haven't seen it in person, if you haven't seen enough images of it, you kind of want to keep an open mind about what are the actual colors, what's the warmth, and this is especially true for an artist like Herbert James Draper, for whom not that many images abound. There's a lot of famous artworks that have been photographed so many times that you can kind of get a better sense of what the color balance is and those sort of things. Whereas for an artist like Herbert James Draper or J.W. Godward, there's usually just like one or two good images, or maybe not even good images, could be low quality images that are out there on the internet, and then those images just get replicated all over the place. So you can see here Aphrodite with a long string of pearls, and that's where the name of the painting comes from, the Pearls of Aphrodite. And she seems to be receiving more pearls from some sort of, I don't know what to call him, like a merman type creature, the male counterpart of whatever the sea nymph is, I suppose. And Aphrodite was born from the sea foam, so that I guess that makes sense to kind of have her in this kind of oceanic environment. And these other women around her appear to be, I think the word is nereid, but again, so just sort of like sea nymphs. And you can see the facial structure that Herbert James Draper loved. It's a very alluring facial structure. It's a facial structure that we respond to in contemporary times, and it's very interesting to contrast. Again, I said I'm going to contrast him a lot with Godward, just because they were contemporaries, and it's interesting to see the different things they gravitated to. Draper likes a slimmer figure, and he likes this more defined cheekbones and jaw. Sharper features, which again, it seems to be more in line with contemporary tastes. So, maybe we can trace contemporary tastes to this one sort of option that was emerging in the late Victorian times, whereas Godward is more representative of the sort of classical ideal of beauty that's kind of prior to this late Victorian environment. He's more of a holdover of that softer, rounder figure. Another thing we can see here is this trope of the black woman in the presence of this lordly, white, beautiful woman. This is a trope. It obviously has some sort of racist undertones. I'm not really sure what what exactly is being implied there. Although it does seem to it does seem to involve some sort of, inferiority, superiority thing. So I didn't want to ignore that. It's obviously there. And this was part of those times. And it would be interesting to go back and research this trope. It appears infrequently. It's not that common, but it does pop up here and there. Manet's Olympia is probably the most famous example of it. I want to take a quick look at Calypso's Isle. It's another one that obviously it's got all these elements: the rock cliffs, the bay, and the beautiful half-naked woman. Now, this artwork does to me, this reminds me more of sort of Godward's approach, where it's almost just like he just wanted to paint a beautiful woman in the setting that he enjoys painting. And it doesn't really matter that she's Calypso. Her mythological significance, the story here doesn't really, I don't really think it means anything. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to talk about Herbert, James Draper's masterpiece. In my opinion, it's his best artwork, hands down, the Lament for Icarus. I love this painting. It's got everything. It's a striking mythological scene where you can feel the impact of this sort of, it's after the kind of climactic moment, or in this sense, a terrible, tragic climactic moment where Icarus has flown too close to the sun and he's plunged down into the sea. In this imagined scenario, his wings are still intact, and I love that. Like, you don't need to be... Why make them all falling apart if that's just going to ruin your composition? Draper is thinking like a visual artist here. He only cares about the composition, and what a beautiful composition. The way that the feathers just splay out and make all these implied lines going, leading away from the figure of Icarus. The way that it looks like a dead bird, a broken bird, the broken body of a fragile creature. The subdued colors, I don't like those oversaturated tones that, sometimes creep into Draper's work. So this is a great example of, very subdued colors, controlled tones, beautiful and saturated, but just up to the right level, still very earthy and not like overly saturated. And then, oh my God, the forms, the beautiful, would these be, I think, Nereids? Is that how you say it? Again, sea nymphs. These beautiful sea nymphs who have sort of rescued Icarus, not rescued him, obviously he's dead, but have rescued his body from the waves and have brought it, it seems to imply that they've brought him up onto these rocks, unless he fell there. I don't know. It seemed like his body would be more mangled if that was the case. But yeah, this sense of the lament of these beautiful sea nymphs for this beautiful man, and just gorgeous. And you can see here some of the crackling of, I suppose, the varnish that Draper used. You can see this in a few of his paintings. So I don't know if he was using some sort of experimental mixture in his varnish, or I don't know really what is up with that, why you see it in quite a few of his paintings. Obviously, a genius like Leonardo da Vinci also had some mishaps with this sort of a thing, so I don't think it's disqualifying for Draper's genius, but it is a little bit unfortunate. This artwork is currently in the Tate in Britain. I've never seen it. I'd love to see it someday. I thought it might be huge, and it really does feel like an artwork that should be huge. However, when I saw it in the frame, I couldn't find any pictures of it with people standing next to it for sort of size reference. But the frame looks to me to be not sort of large. It looks like a smallish frame, just judging by the wood carving on there. The size of the ornaments. So I'm guessing that this is a relatively small painting, which I don't know. Maybe someday I will paint one, a copy that's gigantic, because it just doesn't it feel like it wants to be huge, like it should be like the figure should be life-size. Those wings should just enfold the viewer. Incidentally, I did this little cheesy drawing of this as I was sort of preparing for this video, just trying to spend more time visually with this artwork. And I love to draw great works of art because, yeah, it's like an excuse to spend more time with it visually, to inspect all the nooks and crannies. And yeah, so maybe I will paint this one someday. Anyway, I am far from the first person to deem this work a masterpiece. It won a prize in I think it was like a forerunner of the World's Fair, or maybe this is just the French pronunciation of a World's Fair, the Exposition Universelle. I don't know how to pronounce French, excuse me. Very cool lithograph, by the way. This is one of the lithographs that I used to show an example of what that looked like. You can see that at that time, 1900, Art Nouveau was very much in the ascendant, and that's a style that I would love to speak about more at some point on this channel. But anyway, so I mean, this painting won a very prestigious award at that very prestigious event. So it was heralded with universal acclaim. And when I don't know when it was acquired by the Tate, but I'm sure that it's popular. I'm sure it's probably on display and it's probably popular, and it's funny to me that its popularity probably has not, despite its popularity, and again, I'm just guessing that it's popular with the viewers, but despite that imagined popularity, it still hasn't received a whole lot of attention from art historians or critics because it is too enjoyable. It is so easy to enjoy this artwork, and so many critics and so many art historians hate work that is easy to enjoy. They want everything to be challenging. There's nothing about this artwork that would repel the viewer. Everything about it seduces and entices you to look. And everywhere you look, you see beautiful things. And yes, I am talking about her ass. God, that is a gorgeous ass. But the seaweed's beautiful too. The water, the way that it laps up against the rocks, the feathers, the softness of that beautiful sienna in the feathers, the way that the shadows melt into the light, just the way that it's painted. If you look up higher, and again, gorgeous faces of these nymphs, beautiful, delicate handling on the lyre. I suppose that's a lyre or a harp. Yeah, it's a lyre, right? But even like the way that he's painted the division of the light and shadow on the rocks, just so much beautiful painting, so much beautiful paint handling, so many things to just savor and appreciate in this artwork. Now, normally I would be worried that whatever followed the Lament for Icarus would be anticlimactic, but Herbert James Draper does not fail to produce sensational artwork that can, prolong the climax, so to speak. What the next few paintings that I'm going to show you all have in common is that they are all about nymphs or dryads or sort of magical creatures, not the big protagonists, not the big fancy names that we know from any particular myth. And this is something that I really like about Draper, is that he seems to really love magic. And here I might be outing myself as kind of a geek, but I really love magic and fairy tales. I can't say I love fantasy, because I do feel that the fantasy genre tends to degrade the sort of more, it tends to take away the magic in magic. That is to say that maybe fairy tales and folk tales and, some aspects of older mythology, seem to be more mysterious to me than the fantasy genre, which tends to render it too plain. But I do love these sort of these mythical creatures, and so it's really fun to revel in this idyllic sense, this idyllic world that Draper wants to take us to, where sea nymphs exist and dryads exist, and it's just it is a fantasy. It is escapism, but it's part and parcel of this theme that I keep coming back to about enjoyability in art. And I would love to go into more depth and detail discussing each one of the images that I've just shown you, but unfortunately I don't have the time to do all of that. I especially love this one, the Vintage Morn, and I definitely would like to address this one day in the future. I promised myself that I was going to finish this video tonight, so I am going to have to blast through 4 more exceptional artworks and hopefully do justice to each. But let's start with this, Prospero summoning nymphs and deities, made around 1902 for the Drapers' Hall of London. Now, the Drapers' Hall is, I think it's called a livery group. It's a livery company, which apparently are these, something having to do with like guilds. It almost sounded like guilds when I looked into it. I don't know what they are. All I know is that the Worshipful Company of Drapers just happens to coincidentally be the name of this place that hired Herbert Draper. Don't know if they hired him just because he happened to have the same name and they thought that was fortuitous. I don't know if he had some inside connections or an ancient family connection, or if it's just a big coincidence. But anyway, that's what it is. It's a livery company. And so here you can see a detail of it in the actual ceiling with the sort of molding around it. And I don't know how large it is. It seems like it was pretty large. There's a multiple drawing studies that he did in preparation that exist, and it's a pretty cool, pretty complicated scene. It is as ambitious as any of the sort of high classical artworks of the great sort of Baroque and post-Baroque European painting traditions that you might see in other wonderful ceiling frescoes from the 1700s or early 1800s. But let's zoom in and take a closer look at this fairly complex composition. Prospero, I believe, is a character from William Shakespeare's The Tempest. I've seen parts of the play, so I don't know the whole story. I'm vaguely familiar, just with enough to know that Prospero sort of has this sort of wizard-like or warlock-like power over certain spirits and the ability to summon these deities. And so there's some Greek mythology that Shakespeare is pulling into this. There's some aspects that seem to be more like English folklore and fairy tales. Really cool story. I actually have been meaning to read it or watch a performance of it. And here in the center of the composition, we can see Prospero in the act of summoning these powerful forces. There's a couple other protagonists there behind him. And up here we have the goddesses Juno and Ceres, the goddess of agriculture. Looks like behind them are a bunch of cupids. And then at the top we have Iris, the Greek goddess of the rainbow. And then back in the middle again, we have this interesting male figure with butterfly wings that appears to be falling or flying downwards. I don't know if that might be Ariel. That was at the name of Prospero's sort of main spirit servant. And then you have this beautiful group of figures down here that seem to be fairies or maybe nature spirits, probably the same thing, right? And it looks like that other figure with the butterfly wings is sort of going down to join them. So maybe this is a scene that would make more sense to me if I knew the whole story. And I'm, frankly, kind of inspired to go out right now and finally read it. It's been on my to-do list for a while. Anyway, overall, just a very compelling, very intriguing artwork. Maybe, I don't know if the photograph is just, maybe taken in a dark setting, or if some of the pigment has kind of like faded over time. It does look that the colors are a bit faded. I would love to be able to see it in person one day. Okay, so the next three artworks that we're going to look at have a similarity in the sense that compositionally, they are all sort of the midsection of a ship. Two, at least, are Greek ships from, it's a story from Greek mythology, Ulysses and the Sirens, and then the Golden Fleece, which would be Jason and the Argonauts. And then the third one, I think, follows along the same thing in the sense that it seems to, I think it's ancient Greek, but I'm not actually sure if this one's supposed to be ancient Greek. But it and also the story, if there is a story attached to this one, I'm not sure what that story is. It seems to be a more inventive sort of idea that Draper might have just had, because if you think about it, a man who's just as obsessed as he was with this idea of the sea nymph, maybe this is just sort of like a fantasy, of pulling up these fishermen pulling up this beautiful woman accidentally with their fishing. And just like with the other paintings, I mean, I wish I could spend a lot more time on each of these. I think they all deserve it. And these three in particular are more ambitious than those other ones that we looked at more briefly, just in that there's so many figures involved, so much complexity in the composition. And I would love to dwell on them longer. This one, I think, takes the prize between the three of them for originality. Just in the sense that I haven't seen this depicted before, so it's very interesting. And that aspect of this sort of very almost dark male fantasy of possession, of finding this beautiful, voluptuous, but now very vulnerable creature. And you have to hope that she'll be okay, because, I'm sure this team of men is very lusty, being out there on their boat, all isolated. Yeah, it doesn't bode well for her, does it? But it's interesting, this figure here in the center seems to be more sympathetic. The way that he's clutching towards his heart, like, almost seems to be maybe more romantic, where some of the other figures are more threatening or scary. So yeah, maybe he's gonna save her from a bad fate. I guess maybe somebody knows the story, if it is indeed a story. And we can find out what happens. But I also think it is possible that Draper just, again, made this up. And so, if it is not an illustration, if it is a standalone painting, then it is what it is, Her fate is forever, will never be known. It would happen in the next moment, and the next moment is not depicted because this is a standalone artwork, So it just leaves all the doors open to all the horrible possibilities. And of course, we're invited to think about those horrible possibilities in very naughty ways that must have been very erotic. And, I'm quite intentional, I'm sure. And some art critics use the word gratuitous as if it was a bad word, a condemnation. And I just love the word gratuitous. I think this is such a wonderfully, deliciously gratuitous painting. And in terms of the artistic merit, just on purely formal terms, look at the wonderful composition. I mean, Draper is always masterful when it comes to arranging shapes and leading the eye through a composition. All these different ropes and nets and the sinews in the arms of the men that are all pointing and sort of converging towards this poor frightened creature. And yeah, I mean, just the amount of study and preparation that would have had to have gone into the models, finding, getting all of these well-developed male physiques arranged in the particular poses that he wanted, and then rendering them as he has. And then just things like, the interesting purple color of the nets, this little flourish of light here on this carved side of the boat. There's all kinds of beautiful details all throughout the painting, not to mention the most beautiful thing of all, the lovely sea maiden. Okay, the Golden Fleece. Now, this must be Medea, I'm guessing. Medea is what is she? The princess of, is it called Colchis? Some sort of distant land that people believe is in the modern day state of Georgia. By state, I mean country, the country of Georgia on the coast of the Black Sea. And I guess that's Jason behind her, spreading out the golden fleece. I don't know. I haven't read the story of Jason and the Argonauts. I did see the old 1960s movie that they made about it. So I got some of the basic overview of it. But whoever this particular person is who seems to be clutching on to Medea, I don't know who that's supposed to be. I know there is some interesting there's some interesting part of the story that has to do with something tragic with her and her children, and this does look like a boy. It doesn't look quite like a man, does it? But I think this is too early for this to be anything related to her children. So I'm just, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's going on here. I don't really need to know, and that's the beauty of a great work of art. You can know a little bit about it to give you some flavor, but everything that you need to enjoy this is already here. Again, the composition, Draper always has wonderful leading lines, slightly off kilter, keeping your eye moving. A lot of those implied lines, leading lines, and just really wonderful way of dividing up the canvas. And the colors here are just gorgeous. I love the reds that he used and the way it contrasts with these sort of golden kind of colors. It's really pleasing. I know I did criticize the oversaturation in some of his works. I think it's mostly the blues and greens in the sea. I don't know why. I think it's a bad thing to overdo blues and greens in the ocean. But I love the reds and the yellows here. So I don't know. For whatever reason, this doesn't bother me. So yeah, you can call me a hypocrite if you want. I don't care. Either sometimes saturation just works, or maybe I just have my preferred colors and it's just a matter of personal taste. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I am oh so tired and I really want to go to sleep, but I promised myself I would finish, and this painting, Ulysses and the Sirens, deserves some attention. This is just such a great painting and I can't not talk about it. So let's talk about it. The first thing I want to say is to reaffirm the statement I made earlier about illustration. I think that it is a big mistake to try to separate works into illustrations and standalone fine paintings, even though I was saying with the Sea Maiden that, if it was a standalone painting, it does sort of function in a different way than if it is meant to be one instant in a narrative for which there is a prior scene and a scene that will come next sequentially. So I know that there is a difference somehow, and yet, think about Greek vase painting. What was that if not illustration? And yet we don't look down on Greek vase painting. It's usually commands a pretty high place of respect within academia and art criticism. And it's fascinating to reflect on the fact that this is a scene that has been depicted visually going back to like 500 BC, 400 BC, like a long time, that this particular story has been compelling visual artists to represent it, to illustrate it, so to speak. And it's such a great story for visual artists because it's all about beauty. Now, this particular scene, what's going on here is more musical beauty, the beauty of music, but what a beautiful way to marry this sort of narrative art that's talking about musical arts in a visual way. It's all here, right? So if you don't know the story, you really should know the story, but Odysseus is the Greek name for Ulysses, Ulysses being what the Romans called him. And this would be a story told in Homer's Odyssey. And Odysseus, and he knows that he's coming up to the place where the Sirens live. And legend tells that they have the most beautiful song in the world, and it lures sailors to their death because they can't resist rowing towards the beautiful music, and they end up crashing on the rocks and drowning. So he's ordered his men to put wax in their ears so that they won't hear the singing of the sirens, but he's ordered them to tie him to the mast so that he can't do anything to go jump in the water and try to swim to them or anything crazy like that. And also he's ordered them not to listen to him if he tries to tell them to take the wax out of their ears and to row towards the women. Now the earliest just returning to the story, it's just such a cool story, right? So he gets to hear this incredible beauty, this beauty that no one gets to hear and survive. He gets to hear it. And of course, it almost drives him mad because he desires so strongly to go to them. But he gets to hear it and live to tell the tale. So what a wonderful story. I love this story. Now, in the earliest depictions of the sirens, they are depicted almost kind of like harpies. So they have the head of a woman, but the body of a bird. And I at least as far as I know, harpies I don't think were considered like particularly sexy or beautiful. So I don't know if in the earliest incarnations of the Greek story, if the sirens themselves were supposed to be beautiful, or if it was just their song that was beautiful and enchanting to the sailors. It's been a while since I read the Odyssey, but anyway, Draper here has taken the liberty to make these beautiful women. So they're as beautiful physically, as compelling physically as their song, as is their song. And another interesting thing, it's kind of interesting to notice that, they seem to be, two of them seem to be nymphs, but then one of them seems to be a mermaid. So he's really taking a lot of liberties here in terms of, the visual vocabulary that he's pulling on. And I don't think there were mermaids in Greek mythology. So, he's kind of mixing it up. He's pulling on, later European folklore again, and just kind of, but it works, right? And that's what matters. There is something transgressive about the mermaid, because you shouldn't feel a longing for this half fish woman. There's something grotesque and potentially disgusting about that, and yet you're still drawn and attracted. And so it's this mix of feelings that maybe goes along with this idea of the sirens luring men to their deaths, like compelling men to engage in an activity that will bring about their downfall. I love the look on this guy's face. Isn't that so interesting? He's just kind of looking at this red-headed mermaid with a look of it's not quite contempt, but it's more. You almost feel like it's more like he's trying really hard to be strong, to twist his gut against the sort of natural carnal desire that's arising in him. He's feeling contempt towards his own susceptibility to this creature. Very interesting, right? And he can do it. He can resist. He has the strength to resist because he's got the wax in his ears. He knows that if he didn't have the wax in his ears, that this thing would be luring him to his death, and he would be powerless to resist. The other guy up there is looking at Odysseus, and he seems to be, wondering. Maybe he's jealous. Maybe part of him is jealous. Maybe he's afraid that his captain's gonna go mad. He doesn't know what to think. Maybe he's like, what is this guy thinking? Doing this. And then there is our wonderful protagonist, Odysseus. I just love this guy. What a rascal. What a scoundrel. What a hero. This is just, isn't it fascinating? I mean, this is everything, right? Isn't this everything? The desire to take the most from life, to live brightly, to burn brightly, to get the most out of this experience, to be open to the madness that it causes, and the danger and everything. And it's wonderful. Look at the way that he leans into the cords, and then that the guy behind him, the sailor behind him, is like struggling to keep him bound, because Odysseus is straining against these bonds, maybe ready to burst them in his desire to go with the sirens. I wish I had a higher resolution image of this painting. It is such a beautiful painting, and I hope it's in a museum somewhere, because I would sure love to visit it in person one day. But anyway, that is it. I think this is a good place to leave off in our look at Herbert James Draper. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've seen some artwork that excited you and maybe inspired you to learn more about him. And I hope that art history will finally give him his due, because he is undoubtedly a masterful artist, just a very compelling visual storyteller in the best possible sense, and one who deserves wider recognition, like I said in the outset. There are a lot of great artworks by him that I didn't even get a chance to show you. So if you are interested in his work, I recommend that you look up his work on a website called the Art Renewal Center. They've got a ton of images, and it's really fun to look at. So I recommend you check them out there. And as always, if you appreciate the work that I'm doing here, please like and subscribe. It helps me out a lot. Ciao for now.